following program is classified G. It's suitable for all ages.
Tonight, on the 12th of November, Finance Minister Basil Rajapaksa has presented Sri Lanka's 2022 budget proposal. However, due to the pandemic, this time the budget proposals were not populist budgets like previous years. Sri Lanka is facing a severe issue to access global fiscal resources, and therefore the economy of Sri Lanka is facing a severe burn. The 2022 budget presented to Sri Lankan Parliament includes types of economic issues, and how will this budget answer to it? Can this budget proposal quell the economic crisis which Sri Lanka is facing these days? Good evening, I'm Suzanne Shanali. Tonight, Other Derana and The Morning Investigates. On 12th November, the government presented what in economic terms can be referred to as a recovery budget in a context where the country has just started paying attention to and supporting the revival of sectors that did not receive adequate attention last year. In other words, unlike in the pre-COVID-19 pandemic era, this budget is expected to ease the economic burden on almost all segments of the society, not only a select few. Doing so has also been challenging, as almost all modes of revenue have also been affected owing to disrupted economic activities. The public and the government both expected a lot from this budget, and different parties point out how the government has either succeeded or failed at living up those expectations. Minister of Finance Basil Rajapaksa, speaking to the media on 13th November at the Government Information Department, explained the rationale behind some of the budget proposals, where he extensively talked about pressing issues such as the cost of living and hardships faced by the agriculture sector. Speaking of the government's plan to support farmers to embrace organic farming, he noted that the budget paid attention to supporting farmers in several ways, including providing support to remove weeds. In order to do that, according to Rajapaksa, the government is planning to encourage the employment of methods that do not involve chemical weedicides. Adding that it is, however, a very costly process, he said the budget has also allocated funds for that purpose. The budget allocated Rs 4 billion to assist farmers to use non-toxic weedicides, and an additional allocation of Rs 5 billion was made to introduce new agricultural technology. In response to the question posed by the media regarding giving compensation to farmers who have suffered crop yield losses, he said,
නරක අතට හිතන්න එපා. අපි හැම වෙලාවෙම ධනාත්මකව හිතිය යුතුයි. අපි ඉල්ලීමක් කරනවා ගොවි ජනතාවට ඔබ සියලු දෙනාම මේ මහා කන්නේ ඉතාම හොඳ වර්ෂාවක් ලැබිලා තියෙනවා. සියලු දෙනාම තමුන්ගේ ගොවිතැන් වැඩ කරන්න. ඒ වගේම මේ වගේ සඳහා අපි කෘෂි රක්ෂණ ආයතනයක් පිහිටවලා තියෙනවා. ඒ වගේම අපේ ජාතික රක්ෂණ සංස්ථාවටත් ඒ ගැන පැහැදිලි කිරීමක් කරලා දැන්ට සූදානම් කරලා තියෙනවා. ඇත්තටම එවැනි පාළුවක් වුණොත් ඒකට වන්දි ගෙවන්නේ රජයේ අය වුණාට ඒක හැම වෙලාවෙම රක්ෂණයක් හරහා කුෂි රක්ෂණ මණ්ඩලයක් තියෙනවා. ඒක හරහා තමයි අපි ගෙවන්නේ. ඒ සඳහා අවශ්‍ය සියලුම ප්‍රතිපාදන සලසුම් කරලා තියෙන්නේ. ඔවුන්ට ඒ වගේම ඒකට මුදල් දීලා තියෙනවා. ඒ අනුව කිසිම ආකාරයකින් එහෙම බියක් ඇති වෙන්න ඕන නැහැ. නමුත් අපි ඒ වගේම ප්‍රාර්ථනා කරනවා කිසිම ගොවියෙක්ගේ අසන්න අඩු වෙන එක වෙන්නේ නැහැ කියලා මම ප්‍රාර්ථනා කරනවා. එහෙම තමයි අපි අනාගතය ගැන බලාපොරොත්තු තියාගෙන ඉන්නේ. ඒක නිසා යම් අලාභයක් ගොවින්ට ලැබුණොත් දැනටම අපි වගා කිරීමට අවශ්‍ය මූලික මුදලෙන් රුපියල් 7500ක් මේ වෙනකොට ගොවින්ට ගෙවලා තියෙනවා.
He also spoke about the rising prices of consumer goods, another pressing issue.
මේක 1947 ඉඳලා තියෙන මේකක්. මේක එක රටකට විතරක් නෙවෙයි මුළු සමස්ත ලෝකෙටම තියෙන ප්‍රත්‍යක්. කවදාක කිසිම රජයකින් බඩු මිල අඩු කරලා නැහැ. නමුත් අපි මේ අවස්ථාවේදී නිෂ්පාදනය වැඩි කරලා වෙළඳපොළට බහුලව මේ ද්‍රව්‍ය සැපීම තුළින් තමයි මිල අඩු කරගන්න පුළුවන්. එනිසා අපේ ඉලක්කය මෙතෙක්කල් වෙන රටවල්වල ගොවීන්ට හෝ සමාගම්වලට ගිය මුදල් මේ රටේ ගොවියට ලබා දෙන්න උත්සා කරනවා.
He added that a sum of 31,000 million rupees has been allocated to give reliefs to those who are in dire economic situations. One such example, according to Rajapaksa, is the allocation of rupees 15,000 million to assist women to start a network of home shops. Rajapaksa also voiced concern about the public sector during the press briefing, where he said that the public sector has become a burden.
අපි පළවෙනිම පිළිගන්න ඕන රටකට උහුලන්න බැරි තරම් රාජ්‍ය සේවය පුළුල් වෙලා තියෙනවා. අපි අවංකව පිළිගන්න ඕන මේ රාජ්‍ය සේවය අපේ රටට බරක්. යම්කිසි ආකාරයක රාජ්‍ය සේවකීන්ට සහනයක් දෙනවයි කියන්නේ ජනතාවගෙන් ඒ සඳහා මුදල් එකතු කරගන්න ඕන. රජයකට මුදල් ලබා ගන්න ක්‍රමය තමයි මහජනතාවගෙන් ඒක ලබාගෙන තවත් පිරිසකට දෙන්න. මම පැහැදිලිව කියන්න ඕන මොනම ආකාරයකින් වක්වත් තව වර්ෂයක් යනකම් මොන ආකාරයකින් වක්වත් රාජ්‍ය සේවය වෙනුවෙන් තවත් මහජන මුදල් වැය කරන්න හැකියාවක් නැහැ.
He further said that even though several measures have been taken for the benefit of public sector employees, the sector cannot be expanded and that new recruitments will be done only to fill the vacancies created by those retiring. He added that although the ideal number of public sector employees is 1,401,890, currently there are 1,423,116 employees. Explaining a number of other budget proposals, Rajapaksa stressed that in the history of Sri Lanka, no budget allocated money to address the cost of living and food security like the 2022 budget has. However, certain parties, including opposition parties, beg to differ, and they claim that the relief measures aimed to easing the economic burden on the people are not nearly enough. Speaking to us, National People's Power parliamentarian Dr. Harini Amarasuriya rejected the government's claim that the budget has adequately addressed the pressing issues such as the cost of living.
The budget actually does not have any proposals related to reducing the cost of living. There are no specific proposals about the cost of living. In fact, what it really talks about is more in terms of sort of vague proposals that are about improving or strengthening the rural economy, and also about providing some kind of support for people who've been affected by COVID, special categories like private van drivers or three-wheeler drivers, so specific categories, but it doesn't really overall address the cost of living issue at all.
Advocata Institute Chief Operations Officer Dhananath Fernando meanwhile expressed similar opinions, adding that the budget has not addressed several other pressing matters in addition to the cost of living. He told us that while giving direct reliefs to address the cost of living may be difficult, there are several large-scale measures that could have improved the country's overall economic situation, including the cost of living.
The government could have basically made the first part of the budget speech a policy statement, because at this given time most of the people, investors, they are all looking at a policy direction on how the government is going to solve the burning issues of the economy. When I mean the burning issues, there's a dollar shortage. How are we going to address that? Secondly, there's a question or like a challenge for exporters, because they are offered a lower rate than the market rate of 234 rupees per dollar, while the banks only offer about 203 rupees. So the exporters have a problem, and at the same time people have a problem with some of the shortages on main essential commodities like LP gas and some other essential commodities. And also investors were also looking at a direction, how are they going to make the investment decisions, and very importantly for the mounting pressure on debt. So those are the key areas that the government should have addressed in the budget. They have touched upon on certain areas, especially when it comes to essential commodity prices of commodity prices. The government announced that the price controls haven't worked, so they are planning to slowly move away from government trying to control the prices. But I think still the problem is because of the control on the dollar as a price of 203, exporters are unwilling to bring the dollars or convert the dollars into rupees. And now what we hear is even the remittances have dropped from 50% compared to last year September, because I think they all are looking at sending the dollars through informal channels. So in that sense, I see still there's a lot of area for improvement in terms of addressing people's main issue, which is the cost of living. And at the same time, we must also admit, generally when you say cost of living, how a budget should address the cost of living, most of the people expect subsidies to give, like another subsidy or increase samurdhi or some sort of a relief measure from the government as a cash transfer or like a subsidy for that particular sector. But we all have to admit our government is on a very difficult time after a pandemic and after following some of the wrong economic prescription. So basically the government really do not have any space for subsidies or any kind of a relief program at this point of time.
Since the government and the opposition is making a conflict regarding budget, many post-budget forums have been conducted to spread awareness to corporates and other sectors about budget proposals. Furthermore, there was an elaboration on what the government's financial and tax policies are for the year of 2022. After the break, we investigate further. Welcome back. There are so many specialists who conveyed their ideas regarding budget proposals, and most of them were mainly concerned about the government tax policies. What is the government's concern about this policy? Here is the rest of our investigation. Imposing taxes is an integral part of any budget, and this budget focused on not only imposing new taxes but also talked about altering tax policies. According to the budget, in 2022, the government plans to increase its total revenue from 1,556 billion rupees to 2,274 billion rupees, while increasing the tax revenue from 1,325 billion rupees to 1,987 billion rupees. It also proposed new taxes. With regard to taxes, Rajapaksa said that when he prepared this budget, one of the most important aspects that was considered was sticking to the tax policies introduced by former Minister of Finance and the incumbent Prime Minister Mahinda Rajapaksa, because the business community and the people raised concerns about changing it frequently and have requested that it should be continued for at least 3 years so that they can make their plans. Speaking of the proposed special goods and service tax, which was presented in last year's budget, Basil Rajapaksa said that the necessary legal provisions have already been drafted and that it will come into effect on the 1st of January 2022. He stressed that the government will stick to tax policies without changing them often. However, he refused to reveal more details about this tax. Meanwhile, Central Bank of Sri Lanka Governor Ajit Niwad Cabral, speaking at a post-budget forum titled Dissecting the Budget 2021, organized by the Centre of Banking Studies of the CBSL, talked about Sri Lanka's tax policies.
We must appreciate that no policy can be continued without changes at all. Some changes need to be done. There will be always the need to tweak certain policies, to improve certain policies. And that kind of a freedom and space must be available to any government in the implementation of policies. Policy consistency does not mean that once you set a policy that it will be there forever without any change.
During the same discussion, Treasury and Finance Ministry Secretary S.R. Artigala added,
This is a growth-centric budget. This budget was formulated to boost the signs of growth that we have been experiencing since the pandemic. And the government is of the view that ultimately the sustainable economy that it wants to bring about is only possible with an aggressive drive towards bringing the structural reforms that will promote investments and productivity. As such, the budget can be looked at as a budget that has targeted reforms aimed at broadly 4 aspects. One is to strengthening the external position, shift to manufacturing-based investments, supporting the vulnerables in a targeted manner, strengthening the fiscal position.
Dhanananth Fernando also spoke about tax policies, adding that Sri Lanka is in need of serious structural reforms to the economy. He talked about how the government's financial policies could have been improved.
Finance Minister has indicated that we are seriously considering on reducing our expenditure. So as a result, he has frozen the construction of buildings and things like that in the government sector. And also he has given an indication by asking to cut down about 5 litres for government workers. It may not be a significant saving, but at least it indicates that we are considering at cutting down the expenditure, and as a leadership that they are considering cutting down of expenditure. And also the parliamentarians' retirement has been extended for 10 years. So those are all good indications. It may not save a lot of money to overcome our economic crisis, but it provides some signaling. But the question is, at the same time, there are some policies which are contradicting on the same signaling process. For an example, the budget also highlights a further recruitment of some firm for the government sector as well.
Fernando said that overall, even though the budget has shown some signs of cutting down expenditure, he was of the opinion that it is not adequate to overcome the current economic crisis the country is facing. When questioned about what the government could have done differently as far as the budget proposals are concerned, Fernando added that the government could have paid more attention to addressing the foreign debt issue, as the country is spending about $4 to $5 billion a year in contexts where foreign reserves are also declining. He added that in a context where investors are looking at how Sri Lanka is planning to solve the debt crisis, the budget does not adequately explain as to what new strategies the government is planning to adopt to address that issue.
So I think that could have been a main area that could have been addressed from this budget, because that would have provided a lot of clarity for most of the investors and also the stakeholders. Maybe the government keeping it to manage by the central bank, but in my view, central bank is mainly for the monetary policy and to provide to keep the inflation under control. But the finance ministry has to provide a clear direction on what are we going to do with our the debt problem.
Speaking of the same, Dr. Amar Surya said,
As a whole, the country is facing certain critical issues which have not been addressed by the budget. The debt, the increasing debt, falling the dollar reserves, foreign US dollar reserves, and also the fact that our government incomes are declining, are falling. So we really needed a budget that would address those 3 critical issues, right? So we needed to have proposals for increasing government revenue, for how we are going to service the debt.
She said that even though the budget contained certain proposals addressing certain aspects of the said matters, there were no concrete proposals to achieve them, and that even the measures introduced to cut down on government's expenses were not adequate to address the overall economic hardships.
So there needed to be ways in which we could have addressed those. There needed to be some kind of restructuring of our tax system so that we are not so dependent on indirect taxes, right? So that, as you know, indirect taxes disproportionately affect the poorer sections of the community. The government could have come up with somewhat different or innovative ways of addressing the issues that we are facing, but what was presented instead was a very traditional, budget that seem to ignore the reality of people's lives as well as the sort of macroeconomic, very serious macroeconomic situation in the country.
Through the budget, the government has informed the public what it can give and what it plans to gain. And in a context where there is no promise that the pandemic would come to an end next year, the people will have to manage their economy more wisely. At the same time as those who spoke with us, the government too has a responsibility to understand that a budget entails responsibilities that go beyond allocating funds and finding ways to collect funds. Thank you for taking the time to join us on Investigates. Investigates will return next week with another matter that affects you and me. Till then, see you soon.